YouTube, we're talking college sports in the Deep South where college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Once again, it's K2 to go for Vernon Speak Sports. We're mostly talking Auburn football and occasionally the rest of the SEC. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang to get it real active in the comment section. Let's go ahead and get it going like we normally do. Here on Vernon Speak Sports Auburn on this podcast, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. War Eagle. I've been kind of on a Georgia kick for the last couple of days. Did a video I think yesterday, about the Georgia Bulldogs and their relationship with the Auburn Tigers, as Georgia has basically had their way in this series for the last 20 years. Now, we talk more specifically about Georgia today as to whether they're ready to go over the hump from being merely contenders and actually executing the deal. Kirby Smart, I think he is very capable of doing so because of his recruiting efforts. Obviously, coming off the number 2 recruiting class from 2019, if you look at that recruiting class, it does not taper down as far as average rating of players, probably till the second page. Georgia's doing an incredible job of recruiting. However, we got to look at this thing from a very realistic standpoint, and we talk about Kirby Smart. If you talk to any Georgia fan, their main response, at least the ones that I run into, is trust the process. And I understand trusting the process. At a certain point, though, it has to go from contention to champion. Can Georgia do it this year? Is it even expected for Georgia to do it this year? We look at the schedule for the Georgia Bulldogs kicking off from the gate August 31st, have a date at Vanderbilt, a team that actually defeated Georgia back in 2016. Is Georgia really ready to take that next step? Of course, we would like to think that based on the recruiting classes that Kirby Smart has been able to pull off, that it is time. Of course, the players are there. Of course, the opportunity is definitely there. You look at this particular schedule. You got Notre Dame coming to Athens in September. I think one of the most highly anticipated non-conference SEC champion, not SEC champion, but the non-conference SEC games of the year. Georgia taking on Notre Dame. That will go a long way into talking about the national perception of Georgia, which is very high right now. I think Georgia couldn't be in a better place. You talk about a couple of years ago, back in 2017, Georgia went up to Notre Dame in South Bend at Notre Dame Stadium and made a huge statement. I even coined that when I was doing podcasts on Facebook, that would be the signature game for Georgia for that year. And sure enough, it was. That game led to the optimism of Georgia going into that season, going for the rest of that season. Georgia, the number 1 team in the country, going into Auburn early November, losing that game to Auburn in a very, very, very dominant fashion, really starting to think like, what is going on at Georgia? Now, one thing that Georgia has to fix, they have to fix their on-the-road games against SEC West teams. Of course, losing to Ole Miss back in a couple of years ago, 45-14 or whatever that score was, getting thrashed by Auburn and also getting thrashed by LSU. Those are the little hurdles that Georgia will have to get over. And guess what? You talk about this schedule that Georgia has going into the 2019 season. You got November dates with Auburn in Auburn, November 16th. Dates with Texas A&M at home. That thing is sandwiched in between the rivalry game against Georgia Tech, who has a new coaching staff. Also, when you look at the schedule as well, Georgia doesn't play particularly well against Missouri historically. They win the game but don't play well. Also, you look at even Florida, who has been they've been winning over the past few years, but you can't count Florida out. So is this the year that Kirby Smart for Kirby Smart and his staff, with all the recruiting efforts, finally gets over the hump and finally goes from merely contenders to actually finishing the deal for the Georgia Bulldogs? That's yet to be seen. Of course, you have Jake Fromm, who is returning as quarterback, something Georgia hasn't seen in a long time. Having a 3-year starter basically come back to lead the helm at quarterback. So the Georgia fan base has every reason to be excited coming into the 2019 season, but they still have that question in the back of their minds. When you think about going to the 2017 SEC championship, you're beating your rival Auburn. You're coming within overtime of winning a national championship. You don't get it done there. Then coming into 2018, you get to the SEC championship. Your nemesis, Alabama, you beat them up and down the field and then surrender that game late, kicking you out of contention. Now, here's some news for the Georgia fans. Although I think Georgia, as far as personnel goes, head and shoulders better than any other team in the SEC East, but you still can't discount the emergence of of Kentucky, of Missouri will probably make a little noise with Kelly Bryant being up there. Kentucky having a very good team. Florida also with Dan Mullen having a very good team. It's not going to get any easier in the East for the Georgia Bulldogs. So the path, I think Georgia makes it to the SEC championship. Who they will play, kind of, sort of don't know, because the SEC West is going to be very competitive this year. At the same time, the Georgia fan base is hungry. They want Georgia to finish the deal. They want to give a justification as to why Mark Richt is not there anymore. Kirby Smart is well on track to do this, but has to make a statement in 2019 for the Georgia Bulldogs. Once again, it is K-Stu to go for Vernon Speaks Sports. We're talking mostly Auburn football and somewhat the rest of the SEC. Go ahead and like this video. Go ahead and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports. Auburn War Eagle.